Cool story, bro. More ponies!
I need more ponies.
Written by Shadowflame. Read by no one, nobody, and others. How Murphy Struck. The next morning, we found ourselves loaded on the buses once more, driving over the border of Virginia, crossing over into Washington, D.C. Everyone on the bus was equipped with bags, day packs, sunglasses, and anything else they'd need in the capital city. The day was bright, almost blinding through the bus windows, and the interior was rich with the musk of sunscreen. However, it was just as loud today as it was yesterday. One of the teachers stood at the front of the bus, a younger guy wearing a casual flannel shirt and khakis. He put his fingers to his mouth and let out a shrill whistle to get everyone's attention. After a moment, the bus was relatively quiet. "All right, first day, everyone. We'll be headed to the Smithsonian this morning. We'll let you all go to which museums you want to go to. Just don't do anything stupid." A few chuckles rolled through the bus, along with a few snide comments from certain kids. The teacher continued. "No matter what, stick with a buddy, all right? This is a national museum that won't take kindly to a few teenagers off alone making fools of themselves. We'll regroup for lunch before heading out again to the monuments. Use your time wisely." With that, he sat back down, and the chaos resumed, just as if it hadn't been halted in the first place. In the middle of all the ruckus, I sat on a bench with Dale, with Fiora sitting one bench behind us, draping her shoulders over the back of ours. The three of us had our own bags with us, though Fiora wore a pair of sunglasses over her face. Fiora glanced towards me.
"Well, since Dale and you are obviously buds, mind if I come along?"
I shrugged. "Sure, I don't see why not." I blinked for a second. "Although, could I choose which exhibit we go see first?" Fiora raised an eyebrow, deadpanning.
"Of course you'd actually go into the museum. You and Dale both."
She unzipped her backpack, pulling out a folded-up scooter just so it was visible to them.
"If we're up to me, I'd rub up the sidewalk on this all day."
Dale chuckled politely before turning back to me.
Sure. Where do you want to go first?
"To the building with American history in it?" Fiora pointed a finger down her throat, gagging.
Ugh, hated that class. Why'd you want to go there?
"Well, American history was my favorite class," I replied a bit smugly. "But also a friend of mine wanted me to see if I could figure something out for her from looking at the exhibits."
Figure out what?
Dale asked, now curious. I inwardly grimaced. It wasn't like I could tell them I was searching for any signs of a possible witch family in the American colonies. Even if I did, they probably wouldn't have believed me. "Just something about colonizing America," I replied, avoiding the less believable parts. Dale smiled slightly.
Okay, but can I choose the next museum? I really want to see the Natural History building if we can.
Fiora only sighed.
Great. Now I've just doubled the geeking to be had on this trip between you two.
Not long after, the buses stopped in a visitor's parking lot, and our whole group walked into the National Mall. Though to my sheer disbelief, a few kids in our group looked severely disappointed to find out it wasn't a shopping mall. Seriously, who doesn't know this stuff? It was a wide-open strip of grass separating the rows of museum buildings on either side of it. A small breeze rippled through the grass, cut short enough that the effect was only barely noticeable. The capital city itself was pretty busy with tourists and district residents alike, and here at the National Mall it was no exception. From what I could see, hundreds of people were milling about the Smithsonian. But though the area was big, people still walked around with the air that they were inside a museum. "Well, some people anyways," I thought to myself, glancing towards Fiora. She had pulled her scooter out of her backpack and had ridden all the way here. However, upon reaching the mall, we were excused to go on our own to any of the museums. Once our whole group split up, it was up to me and Dale to try to keep up with Fiora as she rode ahead on her scooter. Of course, she didn't wait for us until she reached the Museum of American History. Long story short, Dale and I ran to catch up with her, and the three of us ended up entering the museum with two of us slightly short of breath, and the last acting mockingly peeved that she had to put away her scooter yet again. Of course, my shortness of breath basically vanished as soon as we entered the building. I say that with absolute delight. because the moment I stepped through the museum's threshold, it felt like I had walked onto Cloud 9. Immediately, I was greeted with the sight of pictures depicting old events, relics within darkened glass cabinets, and the smell of aged paper and fabric mingling with air conditioner. Anything and everything beyond the front doors just screamed with history and stories of the past. Yep, just my little slice of heaven.
So, where's this colony exhibit we're looking for?
Fiora asked, visibly trying to hide the fact she already wanted to leave. Dale, looking slightly uncomfortable at how many people were there in the museum with us, hurried back to us from the reception desk in the corner. He carried a pamphlet in hand, opened up to a map of the museum.
Found it.
He pointed down a hallway nearby.
It should be 4 rooms that way.
I smiled. Thanks, let's get going. Dale chuckled nervously.
Yeah. Hopefully the Natural History Museum isn't this crowded.
Fiora sighed, rolling her eyes as the three of us started moving through the building.
Dale, there aren't that many people here. You're just over-exaggerating.
You're right. Sorry.
Again, she rolled her eyes.
You don't have to apologize either.
The man sighed as he stood in the random exhibit in just a random museum he had chosen to come to. It didn't matter where he went, so long as he performed his experiment today. The only prerequisite he had decided on before was that it needed to be near Capitol Hill, but not swarmed with security and other armed guards. Sure, they wouldn't be a problem for him, but he needed to conserve his energy for later. He was sure of that. At the moment, he waited in the Smithsonian Museum of American History, right beside an exhibit depicting some history from World War I. Several people had passed him already, but the man had been careful to keep his face at least out of sight, either beneath his hat or his sunglasses he wore. He would have preferred his overcoat and mask he'd used on the first capture, but they stood out too much in public at this time of year. For now, he just needed to blend into the crowd, until he spotted the perfect test subject, whomever they may be. He wasn't sure what the extended results of the transformation glove would be now size-wise, so it'd have to be someone small enough he could carry away with him. His getaway vehicle was just out behind the museum, so if he could just reach it, he could easily escape capture. But why bother going through all this trouble? Why risk capture for a measly experiment? Because this wasn't just a test, this would be a threat to the public, and more directly, his targets. He wanted them to know that he had power, and that was one thing they couldn't take from him. A frown creased across his mouth. The man glanced up around the museum, out into the hallway outside the exhibit. He needed to find a test subject soon. The sooner, the better. But that was when he spotted some likely candidates. Walking down the hallway towards his position were 3 teenagers, 2 boys and 1 girl. They were definitely ideal, compared to the other people here he had come across so far, except one of the 2 boys. The taller one was lanky, and since his proportions would carry over into the transformation, he wouldn't be easy to carry away. The girl was the ideal height, but from her sleeveless arms, he could tell she wasn't a weakling. She would most likely put up a difficult fight when trying to drag her away. But, as the man's eyes fell on the last boy, a smile flashed across his mouth. This boy was a good size, and would most likely be easy to carry away, and that fact was all the more clear because this boy definitely wasn't very strong. He would do. The man watched beneath his sunglasses as the 3 teenagers turned and walked into another exhibit. Out of their sight, the man moved from his spot towards the exhibit as well. The time was drawing nearer for the experiment. His smile drew into a sneer. It was time for results, and for terror to strike. But as the man reached the doorway to the exhibit, he gritted his teeth in annoyance. In the exhibit, there stood about 10 people, including the 3 teenagers he had watched enter. But among them was a security guard, standing just inside the doorway. The man sighed to himself. The security guard would have to go first, but that left the risk of his target, the teenager, getting away. Grimacing, the man glanced towards the threshold of the exhibit's entrance, spotting a handle in the wall. He recognized it as a sliding door or steel bars, used to secure the building during closing time. "That'll do," the man muttered, reaching into his pocket and pulling on the glove. The exhibit was just like I expected it to be. Pictures and plaques were scattered across the room, detailing the history of the colonization of America. Several glass cases sat along the walls, all of them containing some kind of relic from the colonies. Rusted tools, worn and faded clothing, and sketches and models showing what colony life would have looked like. It seemed like a great place to start looking for that possible magical family that came to America with the colonists. But as Dale, Fiora, and I entered the room, I felt a bit of doubt gnawing at my gut. There was only one room dedicated to colony history, and a single room in a museum can only hold so much information. I inwardly sighed, taking a once-over glance at all the exhibits I passed by.
Oh well, I'll search here first. Even if I don't find anything in particular, I can always try searching in the Library of Congress.
I scratched the back of my head.
Wait, is that even part of this trip? If not, I'm going to be kind of pissed.
So, Lyle,
Fiora snapped me out of my thought, standing leaning by a display case with her arms crossed.
what are you looking for exactly?
I glanced at her, and she wore a common look I saw plenty of times in history class. Boredom. I shrugged as I skimmed through some plaques along the wall, but they only told about troubles all the colonies faced in general. You know, starvation, heat stroke, etc.
Well, my friend wanted me to see if I could find something more supernatural in the colony histories. You know, like the Salem witch trials, though not quite that.
Dale frowned worriedly as he glanced about the room.
I doubt we'll find any specifics in here. Wouldn't you have more luck at a library, or even the internet?
I was planning on checking the library later,
I replied, though to myself I remembered,
I doubt I'd find anything online, though. The circle ritual Angela found was taken down only a day later, and not to mention the fact that she couldn't find anything else.
Strangely, I had an odd feeling that this family didn't want to be found. Maybe that's what Angela figured too. The moment that thought entered my head, I heard a commanding shout coming from the exhibit's entrance.
Hey, what are you doing? Get... Ah!
Startled, I glanced towards the doorway like everybody else in the room, only to freeze in shock. At the doorway stood a security guard. He was the one who had shouted, and for good reason. Another man had his hands around the guard's neck, and the guard was struggling with the man's arms as he tried to pry them off. Gasps of surprise and shouts sounded from the other witnesses, and I immediately rushed towards the man to stop him, like any good person would. What the heck was this guy trying to do? Kill the guard? This guy had to be crazy to do something like that in a national museum. But suddenly, as they ran towards the man, time seemed to almost slow, as I spotted a faint glow coming off the back of his gloved hand. And I could only watch as everything else happened in a split moment. As if someone were twisting a knife in his gut, the guard screamed, his eyes wide with pain. His body twitched and cracked at his joints, as if he was changing. Instantly, navy blue fur erupted from the guard's skin, sprouting across his arms, his face, beneath his clothes, as his hair grew in length, fading in color to gray. I felt my body freeze as I stopped running. My eyes were as wide as they'd ever been in my life. What the? The guard's hands fumbled in the grip of his assailant, but it was no use. Pain rendered his hands useless, as his fingers seemed to fuse together, becoming blue hooves. At the same time, his neck lengthened and his body shrank, a pair of pony ears springing through his gray mane. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was no doubt about what was happening, but just what? How the frick could this guy transform the guard like that? I couldn't even see a circle for the ritual. That is, even if this guy was using one. The whole transformation had only taken a few seconds, faster than any I had ever seen or felt. The man, the guard's attacker, wore a satisfied grin as he now held a limp blue earth pony stallion by the neck. As if he were a child tossing away a toy he had lost interest in, the man dropped the stallion. There, he laid immobile on the ground, still breathing heavily. As the man turned towards the others in the room, towards me, I saw it on the back of his glove. My breath caught in my throat as I spotted the faint, familiar glowing transformation circle etched into the back of the glove. How did he have it, though? The only person who knew about that circle was Angela, so...
What? Huh?
Shouts of surprise and panic ran through the exhibit, and even past the doorway the man stood in, I could hear footsteps outside, most likely people running from what they just saw. There was no doubt more security would come too. I could feel the tension in the room. Everyone wanted to run from this psychopath. But he was blocking the only exit. There was no way anyone wanted to risk the same thing happening to them that happened to the guard. And none of these people knew what exactly happened either. But suddenly, the man waved an arm behind himself, and as if it were pulled by invisible hands, a barred door slid across the entrance of the exhibit, clicking and locking shut with a metallic slam of steel.
What the?
I glanced to my side, finding Dale standing there, a look of astonishment written across his face. Soundless words hung from his open mouth, as he just witnessed something that defied physics. Standing on Dale's opposite side, Fiora had her hands clenched in fists as she stepped in front of Dale protectively, shouting at the man who had locked us all in this room.
What the hell is going on? Who are you and what do you want?
The man merely smirked. Who volunteers as the next subject? I gritted my teeth, hands in fists.
Test subject? Was this guy seriously going around blatantly transforming bystanders? Just to see what would happen? That's the same as abusing that power. Come to think of it, that's kind of what happened when Angela first turned me into a pony. Whatever. At least she only did it on a friend, and not terrorize a whole museum doing it.
Unfortunately, a lady near the back of the room had chosen that moment to pull out her cell phone and try to call 911. But immediately, the man spotted it. In one swift motion, he raised his open hand towards the woman, and her phone exploded in her hand before she raised it to her ear. I felt my breath skip a beat as I watched what had happened, and I could briefly hear Dale doing the same. Shocked cries rang through the room, and the woman clutched her hand, yelling in pain. Her phone being destroyed, by whatever it was the man did, must have injured her. Confused and angry, Fiora turned towards the man.
What the huh?
Her eyes widened as she realized the man was no longer there. A scream later, all eyes turned towards the woman, only to find the man suddenly standing over her. His glowing gloved hand pressed over her face.
No!
But, just like with the guard, the effect was almost immediate. The woman began changing, screaming as pain coursed through her body. I cringed at the sound of it. Speeding up a transformation was always painful. Even just having the time caused me to collapse to the ground. I couldn't imagine what pain she was feeling with an almost instantaneous transformation. In less than a few mere seconds, a daisy-colored mare with a mane like cream crumpled to the ground in the pile of clothes that were now too big for her. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes were closed with phantoms of pain etched across her face. The man glanced up towards everyone else, and the others began backing away from him in fright. However, the man only clicked his tongue, as if chiding children. Now, I can't be having interruptions. I have limited time as it is. As if on cue, alarms began blaring through the building, like the kind someone could hear from breaking into a bank. Sighing, the man shook his head. Looks like I had less time than I thought. Just like before, he vanished in an instant, and a gasp escaped my throat as he reappeared just beside me, in front of Dale. He raised his glove towards Dale, but my reaction wouldn't let Dale experience the pain that would follow being touched by it. Without thinking, I jumped between the man and Dale, and the gloved hand slammed against my shoulder.
Crap. Oh well, I was just going to transform. It wasn't that big a...
Yeah! Holy mother pearl! Smart!
You know how I described the pain the guard felt like a knife twisting in his gut? Let me rephrase that.
It felt like a freaking chainsaw!
It felt like someone took a giant hammer and busted my kneecaps. Like a bed of nails was laying on me. Like a medieval torturer and a rabid weasel had a heyday on my chest and then used my skin as a doormat on their way out. Like, well, you get the idea. Despite the horrific agony I felt, which felt like it lasted forever and eternity, having a very tedious baby, this was still a transformation, one that I had been through time and time again. Despite its intensity, it still felt familiar. I knew if that hadn't been the case, then this would have hurt a lot worse. But it still felt like a dentist trying to clean out every cavity through every single opening in my body except my mouth. Just saying. During the time I was transforming, I had lost track of everything else. By the time I regained my senses, I found myself belly down on the ground, my own yellow hooves in my sight, stray blue hairs of my mane poking in at the corner of my vision. My body ached everywhere, but I found that I could still move. Barely. I glanced up, only to hear Fiora scream.
Ah!
The man was still after Dale, but Fiora had stepped in his way.
Get away from him or I'll knock your lights out!
Fiora screamed at the man, but quicker than a flash, he shoved her away with his gloved hand. She screamed as she toppled away, in my direction, the transformation taking effect just as quickly as mine had. As the pain hit and her body changed, she lost her balance and fell over. My breathing rasped as I quickly pulled myself up, my legs trembling. But thankfully, I moved quick enough for Fiora to land over my back. My legs almost gave out, though, due to the fact I still had my backpack and my now baggy clothes on. Holding her up wasn't helping the fact that my body was still throbbing from the transformation. However, in an instant, the transformation had completely changed Fiora. I glanced over my back, only to find a moss-green earth pony lying on her belly, draped over my backpack and back. Her mane had grown longer, becoming a brunette color, though still pointing upwards in a way akin to Spitfires from the show. The tips of hair ending in a lighter brown color. Her clothes and bag hung loosely from her, and her face was scrunched in an angry wince as she lay immobile. At least she was fine for now. I quickly glanced back towards Dale. Dale's eyes were wide as they fixed on the man. He was backing away from the man, gritting his teeth as the man only walked closer to him. The man's smirk was gone, seeming to have faded the longer the alarms blared through the room.
Come here, boy. I have a schedule to keep. So...
Freeze!
FBI!
My eyes turned towards the entrance to the exhibit, past the bar door. To my relief, standing behind it was a group of armed officers. But from the looks of two of them trying to pry the door open, they were having trouble getting in. But that didn't mean they couldn't shoot through the bars. The rest had their gun barrels aimed through the door's openings, all trained on the man. Back by Dale, the man cursed under his breath.
Shit.
Suddenly, just like before, the man vanished, reappearing just in front of Dale, his arms reaching out towards the scared boy.
No!
As quickly as I could, I leaped with as much strength as I could muster towards the man. The weight of me and Fiora together, along with the element of surprise, was enough to push the man slightly, while still making sure Fiora didn't slip off my back and faceplant on the tiled floor. But despite my effort, the man must have still managed to touch Dale. He collapsed to the ground, clutching himself as he let out a horrified scream, as if he couldn't possibly handle the pain he was in.
Crap, no!
I gritted my teeth as I could only watch his body warp and crack into the shape of a pony. Umber-colored fur grew over his whole body as a horn of the same color protruded from his forehead. His hair grew to a mane as long as mine as it turned as blue as Arctic ice. Within only seconds, a unicorn smaller than me lay on the ground, shaking slightly, his eyes closed as he breathed in short, sharp breaths. His expression was one on the verge of tears because of the pain he had gone through.
What?
I turned in time to see the man glaring down at me through his sunglasses.
The pain you felt through the transformation should have incapacitated you for an hour at least. How are you still moving?
He slowly moved towards me, ignoring the shouts at him from the FBI agents still locked outside. He didn't even look fazed that their guns were trained on him. I tried to back away, but my legs only gave out on me, and I stumbled to keep upright. Fiora moaned on my back, and to the side, Dale whimpered as his body shook. I glared at the man, unable to move away as he stood towering over me.
What do you think you're doing?
Revenge. I blinked in surprise.
What?
Before I could even say the one word, the man's fist connected to the side of my head, and my vision turned black as I felt myself hit the tiled floor.
I hate falling on...